So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest in this series of Lockdown Your Learnings webinars from Technology Ireland ICT SkillNet. My name is Paul Hearns. I'll be your host for today. I've been documenting technology in business for more than 20 years, having edited TechPro magazine and chaired the TechFire event series. In this edition, we're going to be looking at digital transformation and change. I'm joined by Niall Moran, Technical Director of the Microsoft Digital Technology Centre, and David McGrath, Head of the Business Agility Practice for Explio. Niall runs a team of technical experts that help customers apply cloud technologies to their digital transformation initiatives. And David, in the Business Agility Practice for Explio, supports clients as the lead on agile transformation programs, and he is Six Sigma Black Belt certified. So each of our speakers will have a short presentation followed by a moderated discussion panel. And there are two ways to interact with the panel. First of all, you should all have a chat button at the bottom of your screens, or the top, depending on what kind of device you're on. And you can submit a written question that way. You should also have access to a raise hand function. And our producer today, Aideen, will be able to unmute your mic and you'll be able to address a question directly, or a comment or insight. So we're looking for various types of interaction in that. So just a reminder that this session is recorded, and this is to facilitate later editing so that it can be added to the existing Lockdown Your Learnings sessions, which are on the ICT SkillNet YouTube channel. And there are already a wealth of topics up there available to view, and that can be accessed either directly on YouTube or on a link from the ICT SkillNet website. So today, over 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about digital transformation and change. So digital transformation would have been high on many agendas prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's thought that that has had a polarizing effect on the situation. So on the one hand, there are many who went into survival mode and simply shelved their transformation ambitions, whereas others pressed ahead, recognizing that change was more needed than ever. So what we are asking here today is whether there is perhaps a wider context for the transformation and change agenda to be understood in. So as we are all expecting turbulent times ahead, and believe me, the pandemic measures that we're seeing at the moment are a complete backdrop to the discussions and merely highlighting the volatility that's to be expected. So what we're asking is, are the lessons from digital transformation in terms of the drivers and methodologies, can they provide a means by which organizations can better understand change, be more change ready, and as a result, more resilient and better able to cope with the expected turbulence to come? So our first speaker, Niall Moran, Technical Director for the Dublin Technology Centre of Microsoft, he'll describe how Microsoft's own digital transformation journey led to certain types of cultural change and how those processes and changes fed into the COVID response and beyond. And then our second speaker, David McGrath, from Explio, will talk about the experience of change in working with Irish organizations and illustrating how those change programs can become a change capability. And then obviously in the panel discussion, we'll debate the central premise of transformation becoming and facilitating change readiness. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Niall.
Hello, everybody. It's great to get this opportunity, so thanks very much. I appreciate it. In terms of an agenda, I'm going to cover a couple of areas. The first one I'm going to cover is just to give you some insight into Microsoft's journey over the last 6 months. I won't go into too much detail, but feel free to ask me questions on that later on. And some of the learnings that we've gotten from that, because I think they're important learnings that can apply to any business. And then finally, I'm going to talk about our transformation, our cultural transformation, and how that enabled us to adapt. So any of you that were on have seen me speak at events around our cultural transformation. before. You'll probably know that story, but I think what's interesting about it, especially with COVID, is actually it was a real enabler for how we had to adapt in the last 6 months. So I kind of see COVID as the ultimate test of our own cultural and digital transformation over the last 7 or so years. To just put that into context, you know, because COVID had such a disruptive effect on so many companies across the planet. Microsoft is no different. In early March, in late March, in the last 2 weeks of March, and this is just one example, we saw an increase in the number of minutes people were spending in meetings and Teams and Microsoft Teams go from 560 million to 2.7 billion. We're well over 6 billion right now. But that's a massive increase, and that's a massive surge to take for any company in a 2-week period. Obvious reasons behind that, obviously, you know, a lot of customers moving towards remote working, but this is somewhat akin, if you're familiar with the utilities industry, this is somewhat akin to everybody turning their kettle on at the same time. Okay, so this presents a massive challenge for an organization like Microsoft. And because what we do now is all very cloud first and cloud centric, we have to operate this in such a way that it's available for all of our customers, it's secure, and doing that at such scale with such a spike was a significant challenge for the company. I won't go into too much detail on this just with time limitations, but it is interesting to understand the kind of challenges that we had internally at that period of time and how we adapted to it. And we're quite open about this in terms of how we share this story in public. But firstly, one of the big decisions we had to make was how we prioritize customers. This had a profound impact on our release cycles and our engineering teams. We had to, you know, shelve certain product releases. We publicly shelved one of our devices that we had previously announced. We had to optimize our infrastructure, reroute networking across the globe. So significant engineering impact within the organization. We then had to engage with these customers in a very different way as well. And we've been on a journey over the last number of years to change how we engage with customers and to be more customer centric. But in that 4-week period, and I've seen this myself with my own team in terms of how we've had to engage with customers, we've had to put everything aside and really focus on what our health customers in particular were trying to achieve over those few weeks. And of course, every other customer who were trying to enable their employees to work remotely. So this had a profound impact on our customer engagement and of course our own revenue recognition models and sales models and so on. Ultimately what it's done as well is it's made us rethink about our technology roadmaps and what technology is more important now than it was before. So we've seen a big surge in the last 6 months in releases around Teams, Microsoft Teams, around collaboration, but also around Windows Virtual Desktop and technologies that allow or enable customers to work with their employees in a remote way and in a secure way. We had to pause hiring because all of a sudden you're thinking about, well, the open roles that we've got across the globe, and there'll be a significant number of roles. Are they the right roles? Do we need to pivot on collaboration more than other areas? So that had quite a disruptive effect on the organization as well. And then a big one is how we actually care for our own employees, which is now becoming more and more of a topic of conversation in the leadership teams across Microsoft. We have people who are, you know, working from home, not set up for working from home. Maybe it's not the right environment for them to be working. Maybe they'd rather be in an office. So we very quickly started to figure out our plans around hybrid working and how we can get people back into the office if it makes sense and how we prioritize that. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Just in terms of insights from the last 6 months, this was a study, and I'll share the link. There's some interesting results from this study. But this was a study that we had engaged in before COVID, and COVID kind of accelerated the results of this. But ultimately, we used brainwave analysis to understand how people are fatigued in meetings and compared to in-person meetings compared to video meetings or remote meetings. And what we found is that the amount of fatigue is far greater in video meetings. And of course, people are turning video on more and more so that they can get that engagement, that human engagement that they're missing from being in an office. But this is quite detrimental to people and employees, because what we know is that people are replacing water-cooled conversations and corridor conversations with video calls and scheduled video calls. But this is leading to a huge amount of fatigue. And only about 2 hours into the day, this fatigue is turning into a significant increase in stress levels. So this is something that we need to think about both culturally within the organization. And that's what we're doing. We're thinking about it in terms of how we can culturally adapt, but also then from a technology point of view, how can we help with the technology that we've got? We introduced a mode within Teams called Together Mode, where you can see everybody's video, but more in a theater style. And this actually has been proven to reduce the amount of fatigue. We're also rolling out some interesting insights that people can get from their use of their calendar and their use of Teams, to give them suggestions as to how to block out time in their calendars to reduce that fatigue and help them measure the impact of it. Some other interesting findings, like I say, I'll share the link to the report, and feel free to review it yourselves. But a couple of interesting ones there around empathy and inclusion, for example. So what we're finding is that more and more people are empathizing with other people, because we're all finding ourselves in this situation. So that's a positive thing out of all of this. It means people are thinking about others, and I've seen that myself in my own team. You don't have to do as much work to kind of bring people together, even though we thought that we probably would. People are reaching out to people, having virtual coffees, virtual beers, whatever it is, because they're in this situation. They can empathize with other people and how their situations are. The other one then, the last one, the 52% of people feeling more included, what that essentially tells us, in our normal way of working, 52% of people in normal meetings don't feel included. And that's significant, right? So that's something that we have to think about when we think about this. And what this all points towards is, in my view anyway, is that when we have significant change within an organization, for whatever reason, whether it's market disruption or competition, or in this case, COVID, more and more of the conversation turns to people and culture. And again, as I said earlier on, if you've seen any of the talks I've done on the Microsoft transformation story, it's all been focused on culture and how we've adapted the company from within. Still on a journey, still things to do. But for me, COVID was the ultimate test of that cultural transformation. Just to show that to you at a kind of a very high level, we look at it across 4 pillars: growth mindset, leadership principles, values, and manager expectations. The values and the manager expectations are relatively new. Values obviously were always there, but they were quite implicit. So over the last year or two, we've explicitly added them into our cultural story. And the manager expectations, really important. So this is where I suppose the rubber hits the ground. Okay, you can have the right values, you can have the right leadership principles, but you need your management team really embedding them into the organization, embedding them across the organization. And I believe this cultural transformation that we've been on, and the point in time we're at right now, have really enabled us. If we go back to those last 2 weeks in March, when we had to adapt, the disruption it caused our business, we wouldn't have been able to adapt if we were still the old Microsoft before this cultural transformation. So this transformation, it was absolutely key. And the 2 pieces that I've kind of outlined there, there's a lot in there that we struggled with through COVID. For example, deliver success. How do we do that? How do we continue to deliver to the market the way we have been over the last number of years in this environment? How do we create clarity when there's a huge amount of ambiguity, and we still have that ambiguity? We don't know when we're going to be out of this. We don't know what's happening in January. And we've had to alter our forecasting and our sales models, everything to adjust to that. But the 2 big things for me are the growth mindset and the care. And I've spoken about growth mindset before, how I believe it's a muscle. I don't believe it's a binary thing that people are fixed or growth mindset. I think we're all both. So COVID for us was a real test and a real example of where we had to really exercise that growth mindset and adapt to our customers' needs in real time over a very short period of time. And that final one then, care, from our managers' expectations point of view, we've really gone deep on this over the last number of months. How can we make sure that we understand every single individual's unique situation? We can't make assumptions about whether people are struggling or not struggling. We need to understand the individual, and that comes back to caring, and that comes back to the manager expectation. And the way I put that is, if managers don't care about their people, those people aren't going to care about the company. So it's a core thing to have in your culture, and to call out in your culture. So thanks for that. It's quite a quick tour of the story. What I'd finish by saying is, with any transformation project, you'll have a project plan, and you will think about it from a digital transformation point of view, and that's really important. But don't forget the culture piece. If that culture within the organization isn't right, then the company may not adapt when it needs to adapt in the future.
Great, Niall. Thank you very much. Some really interesting material there, and I think that message of cultural change is really key, and it's something that recurs whenever people examine their change processes and experiences. So moving on then, our second speaker is David McGrath, head of the business agility practice for Explio, and he's going to draw on the experiences of working with Irish organizations to illustrate how change programs can become a change capability. So we're just going to do the share on David's slides now, and I will hand over to David. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, ICT, for asking me to talk today. Really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks to everybody for coming along. Hope everyone's staying safe and well. I'm going to share three observations, three things that we've noticed over the last 6 months as we work with our customers. Very quickly, some of you may or may not know Explio. We were previously known as SQS, about 15,000 people globally, in Ireland, about 500 consultants across a number of locations, Belfast and Dublin. Just to give you an overview of who we are. Just a brief overview of who I am. As Paul said, Dave McGrath, and I've worked in a number of different organizations across a number of industries over the last 25 years. I came across this tweet a good few months ago, and it made me chuckle, and I shared it with quite a few other people in terms of, well, who actually led your digital transformation for your company, and was it actually COVID-19 that actually drove the digital transformation? That there'd been an agenda around, there have been some people talking about it, but was COVID-19 actually the genuine business case that everyone had been looking for to say, actually, we need to do some digital transformation? I guess the other point to make as well is that digital transformation means different things to different people. It can cover from, putting in new platforms. It can be digitizing processes. It could be how you engage with your customer. But there's lots of different ways that digital transformation can manifest itself. But I think we can all agree the last 6 months has actually challenged every organization to look at the digital transformation in some shape or form. These are the three things that we've noticed over the last 6 months in terms of organizations and how they've managed or coped or adapted within the last 6 months. The first one is actually having a change capability. It was interesting to hear Niall speak previously. Microsoft had obviously been on a journey. There's that often used word journey, but they had been actively working on a program. So COVID comes along, they were able to adapt because there was a program in place. So has the organization actually got a change capability in place? Second one that we've noticed is around comms. So having the feedback loops to actually understand what the customer's needs are, and actually can you meet those needs, and have you met those needs? So being able to react and being able to pivot based on the feedback you get. And the third one is around having the capability to link your business and your customers into a digital community that sustains and potentially grows your business itself. In terms of a change capability, we certainly see the need for a change capability is driven both internally and externally. And again, Niall mentioned the word muscle earlier on. It is a muscle. Have you got that capability? If you're not using that capability on a regular basis, you don't have that expertise within the organization. Larger organizations need even more change capability because it's harder to actually change those larger organizations. There needs to be a coordinated approach. There needs to be skills. There needs to be those kind of people that are familiar. So it's almost having a pattern, having an approach, or having a map that as change comes in, you're able to actually adapt rather than starting from scratch and having to reinvent the wheel. So that pressure can come internally in terms of your own organization is looking to adapt based on what it's facing outside, and also then your external customers are also putting pressure on you in terms of how you change your organization and how you adapt. So the key message here is to build a change capability within your organization. And as I say, we've seen a number of customers who have been building that change capability thus far were able to adapt a lot quicker than those who didn't have that change capability in place. Second one is around communications and being able to identify the feedback and the right kind of feedback, and being able to measure that you've been able to address that kind of feedback. So again, internally and external comms are definitely elements here. So in terms of the feedback loop from your own internal comms is a vital part to understanding. You know, the best placed people to give you feedback on those challenges that your customers have are your staff. And certainly in a heightened change environment, you want to be able to get that information to the right people so they can actually make informed choices of how you can allocate your time, your resources, your capital, whatever the case may be. So having those internal comms structures in place is actually really important. And again, building on what Niall said earlier, even in terms of communicating what the approach is within the organization, keeping people updated, really, really important. And then from an external point of view is, again, being able to have those channels where you can actually get information from your customers, understand some of the challenges that they have, or even actually introduce new ways for them to communicate to you. I'm sure we've all been talking to our service providers over the last 6 months. It's really noticeable the number of channels that service providers, it isn't just a telephone now, it's a WhatsApp, it's a chat robot, it's a multiple channel way of gathering and servicing your customers. So again, the key message here is that in times of change, you actually need to be even more focused on listening to your staff and to your customers. So that's the second thing that we've noticed. The final one that I wanted to share with you was around community, which might feel a bit, fluffy, a bit touchy-feely, but it's actually, I think, a really, really important element. We are social creatures. People crave that interaction, that, as Niall said, that those water cooler, coffee dock moments. And that's lacking now because in a lot of cases, we're all working remotely. So it's actually trying to create that community within your own organization for a start in terms of the internal perspective. In terms of creating those communities through a digital platform, be it Teams or whatever the case may be. But that's a really important thing, because you can't underestimate, and we've certainly noticed this just in terms of the pulse surveys that we've been doing with our own staff, for example, in terms of the feedback is people genuinely value the sense of community. It's, you know, the virtual beers or the quiz nights or just having those coffee sessions where people just can get together, or the midday yoga or whatever it is. They're really important. Can you put a value on them? No, but you get the feedback from people that they value. So having that community piece is really important. And then in terms of externally, again, really important, because you've got to maintain, or you've got to help build relationships with your customers, and you've got to do that remotely. So again, you've got to look at building that external community with your customers to help your organization sustain and hopefully build into the future. So again, the key takeaway in this particular one is the lack of physical community needs to be filled by a digital one for your organization. Just to wrap up, key change capability, build that change capability within your organization. If you haven't, start now. It's going to sustain you. And it's got to be invested in, because it will actually help your organization long term. Comms, again, focus on giving yourself the opportunity as things start to pivot, as your customers start to change. You've got to have those feedback loops that you can actually get access to them, understand what their problems are, and I'll actually make sure as well that you are addressing those problems in a timely manner. And then the final one is, again, around lack of physical community needs to be filled by some kind of digital option across your organization and obviously out into your customer base. Okay, they were the 3 observations that I wanted to share with people. Really appreciate your time, and back to you, Paul, I think.
Thank you very much. Again, very interesting points there, and recurring themes. I think that the fact that cultural element is so important, and I think the words there, community and communication, are so integral to the processes, and as you said, building a change capability. So again, it feeds back into our central theme today, which is whether the exercise of digital transformation can provide lessons for being more change ready, and perhaps even, as we expect a volatile future, change led. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open the mics for our 2 speakers, and we're going to go into our discussion panel. So again, just a quick reminder on that, you have the chat function, the Q&A button on the bottom of your screens, or top, depending on what you're on. So you can write a question in there. You can also use the hand up to attract attention, and we can open your mic from there, and we can allow you to participate. We'll also have a couple of polls which you will see on your screen, and you can vote in as well. So we'll use those as part of the discussion as we go. So we have on the clock up to about 1:45, so we'll crack on with that. But just to allow you to gather your thoughts and to prepare a question or 2, I have 1 or 2 questions which I'll address as well. So both Niall and David, we have seen from various reports that some organizations have abandoned change plans and some have accelerated them under current conditions. So in both of your respective experiences, maybe David, if you want to take that first, do you have any sense of a proportion of how many organizations have pressed ahead with transformation plans, and how many have shelved them, perhaps going into a sort of a survival mode?
Sure. I think initially, if we go with some kind of timeline here, I think March, April, I think everyone almost froze. Most organizations went, hang on a second, before we make any choices here, let's just hold on for a second. After saying that, we've certainly seen we've certainly seen the majority of the organizations that we we work with have continued to actually do programs, or have actually introduced programs because they didn't have one previously, and they realize, that they do need to have one in place. So we've definitely seen a pause, but we've also seen the fact that most organizations have then realized, okay, we actually need to keep going, or we need to introduce one. So that's certainly what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 months since that pause phase came to an end.
Okay. And Niall, then what's been your experience there?
Yeah, so absolutely, a lot of companies have paused is, I suppose, a good term, but the firefighting is another one, right? Because there were a lot of companies, a lot of customers that we were working with that just weren't set up for this, and not even in a kind of a change management perspective, but even just from a pure technical perspective, and enabling people to work from home and so on, just not set up for it at all. So those companies, they've been kind of firefighting, I would say, for a little while now to kind of get that capability and enable people to work from home securely. And then I would say it's probably split then. There's kind of, right down the middle, there's probably 50% of the companies we've been working with that had been on digital transformation journey for a number of years. And this has definitely tested it or accelerated it, and they're able to continue on. So it's a real mix. But I think more is to come, right? We don't really know what the impact of all of this is truly going to be, because the focus for the last few months has been really on remote working. But to the points I made earlier on, I think there's a lot more disruption because of this within companies, in terms of market potential, competitive threats, supply chain. There's deeper issues than just remote working within organizations that so as you look deep into their change programs, you'll probably see that they're going to have to change their change programs, and it all points toward just being in a constant change mindset.
Yeah. Well, again, I think coming back to a point that both of you made there in terms of the cultural change, in your respective experiences, and maybe Niall, you might take this one first, is have all of the digital transformation programs that you have encountered thus far resulted in that kind of cultural change, and I suppose cultural discovery that organizations go through when they implement these change programs? Because it seems that organizations tend to learn as much about themselves as they do about what they're doing in these programs. So yeah. Is it that perhaps the successful change programs result in this kind of cultural change?
Yes, but then I'm yet to see a change program that's finished, right, to be quite honest. So it's hard to say what the outcome of it is, but I think from my personal experience with the customers that I deal with, it's been really digital transformation, and what that means is, replacing manual processes with digital processes and automated processes and so on. There's been a lot of that, and less on the cultural side. And certainly as organizations try to become more digital or digitally native, they're realizing there's tons of cultural pieces that they need to reset on. I mean, a simple example of that is, they buy the technology, they deploy the technology. Technology has a really clear return on investment and value proposition for the organization, but just getting people to adopt the technology becomes the blocker. And then they roll out a training program, and then getting people to adopt the training becomes the blocker. And really, that's because culturally within the organization, we use this term digitally native. They maybe haven't, and an example of one customer, actually, they never really thought about training and learning and skills development as being a core responsibility for everybody. It was always seen as I'll get to that if I'm not too busy. And that's a great example, I think, of a cultural shift companies need to make before they can really embed digital within their organization.
And David, how's your experience been there in terms of
Yeah.
that cultural realization?
Yeah, I just as Niall was talking, I see, because I used the word journey earlier, it's actually not about the destination, it's the journey you go on. You may not end up where you think you're going to, where you originally thought you're going to go. It's actually the learnings you get on that journey are really, really important. I guess when I'm looking at an organization, traditionally, I kind of look at things in terms of, the people, the process, and what I call platforms or technology. And most organizations immediately go for, let's get a platform. That's going to solve our problem and that will make us a digitally transformed organization, without necessarily focusing on the processes and on the people. And when I talk about processes, I'm talking the back end processes. I saw a very good little video the other day of someone showing how a ticketing machine worked in Tokyo, and it was actually they'd cut away the side, and as the person put their ticket in, it was just a human being grabbing it and putting it out the far side. So lots of organizations put a digital spin on, but they still have 19th century processes within the organization. So they've speeded up how they can service their customers, but there's still lots of paperwork going around within the organization. So it's not just platforms. You've got to look at processes. And as Niall quite rightly said, you've got to look at the people as well. Have they got the skills? And it's not about training, it's about learning, because again, some of them may not be digitally native. So you've actually got to learn. You've got to give those people those learning programs as well. So it's actually looking at all three elements. Every organization is different, but it's some combination of those three areas.
Okay. We often hear the word unprecedented applied to the current situation, and I suppose that is reasonable to a certain extent. But are there common lessons just in terms of dealing with uncertainty and disruption from previous periods of the same that can still be applied? So despite the pace of technological change in the meantime and the transformation agendas that people have pursued, are there kind of common rules of thumb that can still be applied for people to allow them to get a handle and to start to develop those kinds of change templates that David mentioned earlier? Niall, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think I mentioned growth mindset earlier on, which to kind of can sound like a bit of a fluffy term, but for me, it's actually at the core of all of this, because the before you can deal with change and ambiguity, you have to admit that you don't have all the answers. And that's actually a really difficult thing for not only people to do, but for organizations to do, right? Because culturally, a lot of organizations, and Microsoft would have been no different, would be, you're paying people to have answers. You're paying people to know their job and know what they're doing, and not come into a room and suggest that they don't, right? That's just kind of how we're made up. We don't want to look weak, right? So for me, I think one of the core learnings we need from all of this is we actually don't know the answers. We don't know what's around the corner with COVID. We really don't. We're not in control of it. So we really don't know the answers. And if you kind of start with that, it's a huge sense of freedom from that, and then people can build on top of that. Right? Okay, if I don't have all the answers, if I'm not expected to have all the answers, then that means I do need to learn new things, right? And it means I do need to experiment and take smart risks and all that sort of stuff. And I think if we can't get that piece right from the start, change programs will be just another project that gets delivered within an organization.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that as well in terms of, I completely agree. We don't know the answers. So what that forces us to do is to improve the way that we collaborate and communicate within the organization. No one part of the organization has the answer here, and whatever change we put in place has impacts both upstream and downstream. So it's how you bring the right people together to actually work collaborate to actually figure out, okay, if this is what we think might happen, how could we approach it, and what's the impact it has on this team, on that team, and I think one other piece that I would throw in here is that I think it challenges the organization to look at the business model and to look at their strategy and to actually have a good sense of what the organization is about. Niall certainly showed us some examples with Microsoft, but what's the organization about? Because if we're going to change, we need to know where we are today rather than just randomly changing things hoping that we'll get some kind of improvement. So it's understanding what your organization is about.
Okay, I'm just going to share those poll results then, because they're fairly unequivocal really, in that the vast majority of people who voted indicate that their plans were affected, digital transformation plans were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I suppose it tallies with the experience that we've seen, or that has been described in terms of those polarizing effects. So maybe just before we close, then, if we could line up the other poll, the second poll question there, Aideen, and we'll come to that before we close. So I suppose just to wrap up, because we're coming close to time. I suppose maybe a final comment from both of you in terms of, as organizations do embrace the change that is inevitable for the next in the next sort of 12 to 18 months in simply dealing with the changing conditions. Just a reminder maybe about how the lessons from those changes can be brought together to develop that muscle that we talked about, the change capability, as well as the specific transformation plan. So maybe, Niall, if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, I think it goes back to people, right? At the end of the day, organizations are nothing without their people. So I would suggest that companies really take stock of that. What are we doing for our people? How are we empathizing with every single individual within our organization? And because there's a huge amount of creativity within your organization, okay? And if you're going to change your organization for whatever reason, you need to tap into that creativity. It can't be, a special crack team of change people that do it, or the leadership team that do it. It's going to be everybody. It
should be actually something that we teach, and that we encourage everyone within the organization to actually play a part in. So it's building that capability, not only within a specialist area, but actually across the whole organization. It's actually that growth mindset, as Niall highlighted.
Okay, and just sharing those poll results, then we can see a fairly reflective split again, insofar as only 38% reckon that their organization is change ready to meet the coming challenges, whereas the same don't know, and a strong 25% feel that they are not prepared. So again, that's fairly telling, and probably tallies pretty well with your respective experiences. So okay, we're just slightly over time there, so we're just going to do our wrap up. So first of all, thank you to our speakers, to Niall and David. Very much appreciate your insights and sharing your expertise. The upcoming webinars in the series. So there are further topics that will be of interest to you there. So you can see next Thursday, there's going to be Dayan Cusick, and he's going to be talking about digital transformation again, but necessity accelerated by technology. And so some interesting insights there. So I'll be back again on the 8th of October talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automation, releasing human potential. So again, emphasizing that cultural element in particular to be important in how organizations go forward. So then Danny O'Neill and creating high performance sales cultures, and Then we're going to look at education and training in a later session, and we'll be joined by Mary Cleary of ICS and Mark Jordan of ICT SkillNet to talk about how in the constant change environment, education and training needs to change. And then Carmel Summers will be talking about aligning organizations' business and human capital strategy for competitive advantage in late October. So just there are applications still open for 2 of the ICT SkillNet programs from DCU, the Masters in Blockchain, Distributed Ledger Technologies, and the Masters in Computing for Artificial Intelligence. Just one other point of reminder then is that a recent initiative from ICT SkillNet has just been launched, the Future in Tech programs. And these are 7 new technology skills programs to help non-tech job seekers to develop digital skills. And there's full information there on ictskillnet.ie. So the closing date for applications for that is the 16th of October. So do spread that one far and wide among those who you think might be able to avail of that. So that's it for today. We're just going to wrap up there. Thank you to everyone involved, our speakers, David and Niall, our producer, Aideen behind the scenes, and everyone at ICT SkillNet for the ongoing Lockdown Your Learnings series. So please do join us again for another topic in the series. And until then, goodbye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programs. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.